The words still echoed in her mind, sharp and unforgiving. "You'll never make it. Not in this lifetime. You're too ordinary." It had been Sarah, her closest friend since childhood, standing there with that smug smile, eyes sparkling with mockery. At the time, it stung like fire on exposed skin. They were sitting on the worn couch of her cramped apartment, the same one that had hosted countless late-night talks, dreams, and plans. And there she was, crushing everything with a few casual words. It wasn't just the insult, it was the betrayal. Sarah had been her confidant, the person she thought would cheer her on, hold her hand through failures, and celebrate the small victories. Instead, she had become the first voice telling her dreams were too big, too impossible, too foolish. At 22, just out of college and fumbling through entry-level jobs, those words could have ended everything. The scene replayed over and over in her head for years. The dusty apartment, the peeling wallpaper, Sarah's smirk, the sound of her own laughter biting back tears. It was a moment of shame she carried quietly, tucked away in a corner of her memory, the kind of memory that fueled resentment and determination in equal measure. For months, she questioned herself. She took temp jobs, applied to every position she could, and watched doors close one after another. Each rejection felt like validation of Sarah's words, but instead of succumbing, she began to dig in. She took night classes in business and finance, studied online marketing trends, and even started small freelance projects. Every little step was painstakingly slow, but it was progress. Her friends and family noticed the change, the quiet intensity she carried. Gone was the hesitant, self-doubting girl who had laughed off Sarah's word. In her place was someone alert, meticulous, and hungry. She began to build not just skills, but an understanding of business dynamics, people management, and investment strategies. By the time she was 28, she was no longer a struggling dreamer. She was an emerging entrepreneur with a small but rapidly growing online retail business. It was ironic, almost poetic, how Sarah remained in her orbit. Sarah had climbed a conventional career path, a comfortable but uninspiring role in marketing. They would run into each other occasionally, at networking events, birthday parties, and mutual friends' weddings. Every meeting reminded her of that day on the couch. Every time Sarah casually dismissed her ambition, every smile layered with the faintest trace of superiority. But deep down, she had nurtured a quiet, burning ambition. She would succeed, not to prove Sarah wrong, but to prove to herself that ordinary was just a label, not a limitation. Every contract signed, every client acquired, every positive review online was a tiny victory, a brick in the fortress of her future. She had built something from scratch, something tangible, something that could not be ignored. The real turning point came unexpectedly. One rainy afternoon, she was reviewing quarterly reports for her company when her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number popped up. "It's Sarah. I need your help. Can we talk?" Her fingers paused above the screen. Curiosity battled caution. The girl who had doubted her, laughed at her ambitions, and undermined her confidence was now reaching out. Something had changed. As she stared at the message, memories of that day on the couch flooded back. The disbelief, the hurt, and the resolve that had followed. This was the moment she had envisioned, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. The moment when Sarah would come knocking, needing what she had built. And now, almost a decade later, it had arrived. She typed back a simple response. "We can talk." When? Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the thrill of vindication. She didn't feel anger anymore. She felt power. She had turned what once was a weakness into a strength, and she was ready to see just how far this reversal would go. That night, she prepared herself for the meeting. Not for revenge, not to humiliate, but to assert her place in the world. She reviewed her company's growth metrics, the strategies she had implemented, and the vision for the next 5 years. This was no longer a casual conversation. It was a demonstration of what she had accomplished, of what she had become. When Sarah finally arrived, soaked from the rain, she looked smaller than she remembered. Gone was the confident, mocking friend from the apartment years ago. Now there was uncertainty, hesitation, and a silent plea she could feel in the tilt of her head. the way her hands fidgeted. "Thanks for meeting me," Sarah said, voice uneven. "Of course," she replied smoothly, her own voice calm, collected, and unshakable. She gestured to a chair. "Sit." The simplicity of the gesture contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in Sarah's mind. As the conversation began, it became clear. Sarah had made a series of missteps at work, failed campaigns, poor management decisions, and a sudden reduction in revenue. She had exhausted the internal options and realized she needed the expertise of someone who could lead, innovate, and grow. Someone like the friend she had once dismissed. Sarah hesitated, then finally said the words she had waited years to hear. "I need your help. I need a job. Could you bring me on?" The audacity of the request was breathtaking. The friend who had once laughed at her aspirations, dismissed her potential, and undermined her confidence was now asking for guidance, mentorship, and an opportunity to work under her leadership. She leaned back in her chair, letting the moment linger. There was no joy in humiliation, only a profound sense of fulfillment. She could see the mix of regret and desperation in Sarah's eyes, and in that instant, she realized something crucial. Success wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about claiming your space in the world and choosing carefully who you let into it. Finally, she spoke, her tone measured, calm and authoritative. "Sarah, I can help, but understand this. This isn't about old times or grudges or proving anything to me. This is about growth, skill, and commitment. If you're willing to put in the work, to learn and to earn your place, there is an opportunity here, but it will not be handed to you because of our history. It will be earned." Sarah nodded, relief and awe mingling on her face. She had expected permission, but not this clear, uncompromising standard. And in that moment, the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. The girl who had doubted, who had laughed, who had cast her aside was now in a position to seek guidance, mentorship, and perhaps redemption under the very person she had dismissed. As the rain continued to fall outside, they began outlining responsibilities, goals, and expectations. The air was charged, not with old resentment, but with the electric tension of opportunity and transformation. Sarah's humility was evident. She realized that the path forward would require hard work, dedication, and recognition of the skill, experience, and success her friend had built from the ground up. By the end of the evening, a new chapter had begun, one marked not by mockery or doubt, but by empowerment, strategic vision, and a quiet sense of poetic justice. She had transformed the humiliation of Sarah's words into fuel for ambition, and now she was in a position to shape the future of someone who had once doubted her. That night, as she closed her laptop and watched the rain streaking the city lights, she smiled to herself. The journey from being underestimated to becoming indispensable had not been easy, but it had been deliberate, patient, and meticulously earned. And now, the friend who once said, "You'll never be successful," was asking for guidance, proof that resilience, determination, and strategic action could turn even the sharpest sting of doubt into triumph. The next morning, she woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The sunlight spilled across her office, highlighting the neatly organized files, glowing laptop screen, and the small whiteboard filled with ambitious quarterly goals. Everything she had built was tangible proof of her resilience, her focus, her ability to take even the sharpest skepticism and turn it into fuel. And now, Sarah was coming to her, asking not for advice, but for an opportunity to contribute under her direction. When Sarah arrived, there was a noticeable shift in her posture. Gone was the smugness, the easy laughter that had once cut deep. Instead, she carried herself with hesitation, as if stepping onto unfamiliar terrain. The friend who had once dismissed her was now the gatekeeper, and the weight of that unspoken truth was evident. "Morning," she said warmly but firmly, motioning to a chair. "I hope you're ready to roll up your sleeves. This isn't about titles or friendships anymore. It's about results." Sarah swallowed, nodding. "I understand. I really want to learn." She began by outlining the structure of her company, explaining the intricacies of client management, marketing campaigns, inventory tracking, and investment strategies. Every detail was precise, every instruction carefully measured. She could see Sarah's initial enthusiasm slowly turning into concentrated attention, her eyes scanning the documents, her hands taking notes like a student on the first day of a challenging course. "This company didn't grow overnight," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Every project, every client, every partnership was earned through strategy, persistence, and sometimes taking risks that felt impossible. If you want to be part of this, you need to understand that success is deliberate. It doesn't happen because of connections or history. It happens because of action." Sarah nodded again, a quiet determination starting to replace the uncertainty. There was a subtle acknowledgement that her previous dismissiveness had been rooted in arrogance, not experience. And now, faced with the reality of her friend's accomplishments, she felt the first twinge of humility. Over the next few weeks, the mentorship deepened. She assigned Sarah to small but critical projects, testing her analytical skills, her decision-making, and her ability to work under pressure. Each assignment was deliberately designed to push boundaries, reveal blind spots, and teach resilience. At first, Sarah struggled. Mistakes were frequent, deadlines were missed, and frustration showed on her face. But instead of reprimanding her, she guided her through each error, explaining not only what went wrong but why it had happened and how to prevent it in the future. The approach was meticulous, patient, and strategic, turning every misstep into a lesson, every failure into a stepping stone. Slowly, Sarah began to change. She started thinking strategically, anticipating challenges before they arose. She learned to balance creativity with efficiency, intuition with analysis. She began contributing ideas during meetings that weren't just reactive, but proactive, demonstrating a grasp of the company's goals she hadn't had before. The transformation was visible, and it was undeniable. Meanwhile, the dynamics between them shifted. The tension of the past didn't disappear, but it evolved into a mutual respect, born of effort, persistence, and undeniable competence. Sarah no longer laughed at her friend's ambitions. She mirrored the discipline, absorbing lessons that had taken years to learn. And the most profound change came when Sarah herself began to witness the impact of deliberate leadership, the way clients responded, the way projects flourished, the way every aspect of the company reflected careful planning and vision. There were moments of awkwardness, too. Occasionally, Sarah would stumble back into old patterns of self-doubt, questioning her ability to measure up. In those moments, she would pause, watch, and remind her softly, "I didn't expect perfection overnight. I expect effort, commitment, and honesty. That's how you grow." Those words became the refrain she carried with her, slowly replacing the mocking echoes of years past. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to thrive. Projects she led became successful, her confidence grew, and her contributions began to earn genuine acknowledgement from clients and colleagues. She had become a true asset, not because of her past friendship, not because of obligation, but because she had earned it through work, diligence, and willingness to learn. One day, during a particularly challenging client presentation, she observed Sarah handle a crisis with composure and insight that would have impressed even the most seasoned professionals. That moment was pivotal. It wasn't just validation of Sarah's growth, it was confirmation of her own journey. The friend who once doubted her potential had become a testament to what disciplined mentorship and resilience could achieve. That evening, after a long day of work, they sat in the office reviewing the quarterly projections. Sarah, exhausted but exhilarated, looked at her friend with gratitude. "I can't believe how much I've learned," she said softly. "I never realized what it takes to build something from nothing. Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled, the faintest hint of pride in her eyes. "You didn't need me to give up on you. You needed to choose to grow, to commit, and to trust the process. That's what success requires. And look at you now. You're doing it." In that moment, the past seemed both distant and instructive. The words of doubt that had once cut so deeply now served as a reminder of how far they had both come, albeit in very different ways. Sarah had learned humility, discipline, and the value of deliberate action. And she, the one who had been underestimated, had learned the power of patience, mentorship, and the quiet satisfaction of witnessing transformation firsthand. By the end of the quarter, the company had not only met, but exceeded expectations. Sarah had become indispensable, her growth undeniable, her contributions significant. The dynamic that had once been defined by skepticism and mockery had evolved into one of mutual respect, shared goals, and the quiet acknowledgement of lessons learned the hard way. And as they locked up the office that night, watching the city lights flicker and pulse in the distance, there was a shared understanding between them, one born not of friendship alone, nor of obligation, but of earned trust, skill, and achievement. The journey from doubt to competence had not been simple, nor had it been easy. But the transformation was complete, and the story of triumph was just beginning. The next challenge came sooner than either of them expected. A major client, one of the largest in the company's portfolio, threatened to pull their account due to a critical error in a campaign that had been overseen by Sarah. The stakes were enormous, millions of dollars, the reputation of the company, and the trust of investors all hanging in the balance. For the first time, Sarah faced a situation where her decisions could make or break not only her credibility, but the company's future. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The office, usually a place of controlled energy and quiet focus, felt charged with tension. Phones rang incessantly, emails piled up, and her team looked to her for direction. This was the crucible where she would either rise or falter, where the lessons she had been learning over the past months would be put to the ultimate test. Her friend, observing from across the room, chose not to intervene immediately. Every mistake Sarah had made before had been met with guidance and correction, but this time, she allowed her to take full ownership of the crisis. "I'm here if you need advice," she said, "but this is yours to navigate. Own it, and you'll grow stronger. Fail, and you'll learn in a way you never could with hand-holding." Sarah drew in a deep breath and began assessing the situation. She reviewed every document, every communication, and every decision that had led to the error. She identified the weak points, the missteps, and the overlooked details. Unlike before, she didn't panic. She didn't seek immediate approval. Instead, she applied the principles she had been taught: critical thinking, proactive problem-solving, and strategic planning. She called an emergency meeting with the client, acknowledging the error and presenting a detailed recovery plan. She outlined corrective actions, timelines, and additional support that would ensure the campaign's success. Her demeanor was confident, her explanations precise, and her solutions comprehensive. For the first time, she was not only competent, but commanding respect. The client, initially skeptical and angry, began to soften as Sarah's clarity and determination became evident. By the end of the meeting, not only had they agreed to continue the contract, but they also requested her direct involvement in future campaigns. The turnaround was remarkable. What could have been a catastrophic loss transformed into a demonstration of leadership, accountability, and skill. Back at the office, her friend watched Sarah breathe a sigh of relief, a small smile forming on her face. She realized that this moment was more than just a test of competence. It was a revelation. Sarah had grown from the hesitant, uncertain person who had once mocked her friend into a professional capable of handling immense pressure, thinking critically, and leading with poise. It was validation not just of Sarah's growth, but of the structured mentorship and guidance she had provided. That evening, they stayed late, reviewing the lessons learned from the crisis. "Mistakes are inevitable," she said, "but the difference between mediocrity and excellence is how you respond. You could have frozen, panicked, or blamed someone else. Instead, you analyzed, adapted, and solved the problem. That's what separates leaders from followers." Sarah listened intently, nodding, absorbing every word. "I understand now," she admitted. "I was so focused on what I thought I couldn't do, I never considered what I was capable of. You pushed me harder than I expected, and I surprised myself." The transformation was no longer subtle. Sarah's confidence radiated, her skills sharpened, and her respect for her friend had shifted from distant admiration to profound acknowledgement. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about the growth, the change, and the realization that she had underestimated both herself and the person who had once been doubted. Word of Sarah's handling of the crisis spread quickly. Colleagues and clients alike praised her professionalism and quick thinking. Even the friends who had once whispered doubts behind her back now approached with cautious respect, curious about the rapid transformation. The very people who had laughed at her early mistakes were now seeking her input, eager to learn from the one they had previously dismissed. Her friend recognized the moment for what it was, a turning point. The mentorship had been successful, but success wasn't about control. It was about enabling someone to rise, to take ownership, and to flourish. Watching Sarah navigate the storm with competence, humility, and determination, she felt a quiet pride. She hadn't just built a company or trained an employee. She had guided someone through the transformation from uncertainty to mastery. The next weeks brought new responsibilities and challenges. Sarah was entrusted with more critical projects, each requiring strategic foresight, creativity, and leadership. She met each one head-on, applying the lessons from her past mistakes and the mentorship she had received. Her friend watched as Sarah's confidence solidified, her skills expanded, and her professional identity took shape. By the end of the quarter, Sarah had not only proven her capability, but had also earned the trust and respect of everyone in the company. The colleague who had once been dismissed as unreliable had become indispensable. The friend who had mocked her earlier now seeing the proof of her growth in every decision, every strategy, every successful project. And yet, beyond the professional triumphs, a deeper lesson had been cemented. Success wasn't just about skill or intelligence. It was about resilience, accountability, and the willingness to embrace challenges head-on. It was about taking responsibility for mistakes, learning from them, and rising stronger every time. Sarah had learned that firsthand, and her friend knew that this lesson would stay with her far longer than any temporary achievement. As they left the office that night, the city lights glowing around them, there was a quiet acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. The journey from doubt to competence, from skepticism to respect, had reached a pivotal moment. Sarah's growth wasn't complete, but the foundation was solid, the trajectory unmistakable, and the impact undeniable. For the first time, the roles had shifted entirely. The friend who had once been doubted was now the guide, the mentor, and the authority. The friend who had once dismissed her was now a capable, confident professional, ready to tackle challenges, solve problems, and lead with integrity. And in that balance, there was a quiet satisfaction, a recognition of the power of growth, mentorship, and the transformative force of resilience under pressure. Months passed, and the company's momentum surged to new heights. Sarah, once underestimated and dismissed, had become one of the most vital pillars of the business. She led projects with confidence, inspired her team, and brought creative solutions to complex problems. Every achievement she unlocked was a testament not just to her abilities, but to the countless lessons she had absorbed under the careful mentorship of her friend. Then came the day that would define the full circle of their journey. The company had secured a high-profile investor meeting, a presentation that could open doors to international expansion. Stakes were higher than ever. This time, the responsibility wasn't delegated. Sarah was asked to lead the entire pitch. The office hummed with nervous energy as she reviewed every slide, rehearsed every talking point, and anticipated every question. Her friend watched from across the room, quietly observing, knowing that Sarah had grown beyond the need for constant supervision. When the meeting began, Sarah commanded the room. She spoke with authority, insight, and precision, seamlessly weaving financial projections, market analysis, and strategic vision. The investor panel, a group of seasoned professionals known for their scrutiny, was captivated. Questions that might have flustered her months ago were met with thoughtful answers and confident reasoning. Every doubt in their eyes was replaced with respect, every skeptical glance with admiration. After the meeting, the investors requested a private discussion. The door closed behind them, and her friend could see the transformation in Sarah's posture, the poised, self-assured presence of someone who had earned their place at the table. When the investors emerged, their expressions were unanimous, impressed, convinced, and eager to partner. The deal was secured. That evening, back at the office, the celebration was quiet but meaningful. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhausted but radiant. Her friend approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You didn't just lead a meeting, you owned it." Sarah smiled, a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance," she admitted, "but I also had to trust myself, and finally, I did." It was then that a call came in, a familiar voice on the line. "Hey," said a hesitant tone. It was a former colleague, someone who had once laughed at Sarah's mistakes and doubted her potential. I heard about the investor deal. Incredible work. Is there any chance I could join your team?" Sarah paused, the irony not lost on her. This was the same group that had whispered about her incompetence, laughed at her stumbles, and underestimated her at every turn. Now they were seeking her guidance, seeking the very opportunities they had once denied. She glanced at her friend, whose eyes mirrored a knowing pride. "Tell me more," she said, voice calm but resolute. "We're selective about who joins. Your attitude matters more than your resume." The former colleague stammered, suddenly aware that the playing field had shifted entirely. No longer the gatekeeper, no longer in a position to judge, Sarah held the power, and she wielded it wisely, offering guidance only to those who had earned respect through effort, integrity, and humility. Weeks later, during a company-wide meeting, Sarah's friend addressed the team. "Growth, resilience, and dedication are what drive our success," she said. "And some of you have witnessed firsthand how determination transforms potential into achievement. Sarah's journey is proof of that principle." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. What was once doubt has become respect. What was once hesitation has become leadership. Sarah stood beside her, feeling the full weight of her own transformation. She remembered the days when every mistake felt catastrophic, when mockery and dismissal seemed unavoidable, when her potential was questioned not just by peers but by someone she once trusted as a friend. And now, she had proven, not just to the world but to herself, that diligence, learning, and persistence could rewrite the narrative entirely. The moment of full realization came unexpectedly. Sarah's friend handed her an envelope. "Open it," she said. Inside was a letter confirming Sarah's promotion to Chief Operations Officer, a role that gave her significant influence over the company's direction. The office erupted in applause, not just for the title, but for the journey that had led to it. It was a quiet, profound victory, the kind that wasn't about revenge or proving someone wrong, but about growth, transformation, and the demonstration of what consistent effort could achieve. The friend who had once doubted her now stood beside her as a witness to the culmination of years of mentorship, resilience, and skill. Later that evening, as the office emptied, and the city lights reflected off glass towers, Sarah sat at her desk, reflecting. She thought about the path she had walked, the mocking comments, the public doubts, the personal struggles, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. She thought about how far she had come, not just in position, but in mindset, confidence, and capability. And she realized that the greatest triumph wasn't the promotion, the deals, or the respect. It was the complete transformation of herself from someone who had been underestimated into someone who commanded authority, inspired trust, and led with vision. When her friend returned to her side, Sarah smiled. "You know," she said, "it feels almost poetic. All those doubts, all that skepticism. It fueled me more than anything else ever could." Her friend nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "Sometimes the people who doubt us give us the greatest motivation. But remember, motivation alone isn't enough. You built this with strategy, resilience, and relentless effort. That's why it's yours, and why it will endure." And in that quiet, reflective moment, Sarah understood the full scope of her journey. It wasn't about proving someone wrong. It wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about transformation, growth, and mastery over her own potential. The friend who had once dismissed her was no longer an obstacle, but a witness to her rise, a symbol of how far she had come and how unstoppable she had become. By the end of the year, the company had expanded internationally, with Sarah's strategies at the core of every successful project. Her former doubters were now collaborators, her once critical peers now aligned with her vision, and her friend, once skeptical, stood proudly beside her, acknowledging the extraordinary journey they had shared from doubt to undeniable success. In the end, Sarah had not only achieved what her friend had once said she could never do, but she had done it on her own terms, with integrity, intelligence, and unshakable determination. And when she looked back at the person she had once been, she smiled, not with arrogance, but with the satisfaction that comes from mastering one's destiny and turning past doubts into a powerful narrative of triumph.